I went into a coma after an accident, and 13 days later, when I regained consciousness, I found divorce papers on my bed and my 5-year-old son crying. My loyal husband had a new wife. Too bad he didn't realize I'd wake up from the coma so quickly. The first 6 years of my marriage to Miles felt like a dream. There were days when everything seemed so effortless. Waking up next to him, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air as we both prepared for the day, the sound of our son Jack laughing in the next room. It was the life I had always imagined for myself. We'd met in college, young and filled with hope, both of us navigating through life's complexities with ambition. Miles had always been easy to love. His smile was disarming, his charm irresistible, and for a long time I believed that our love story was the perfect one. We had built a life together. Our small house, with its worn but comfortable furniture, was a testament to our shared history. It was where we had spent long nights talking about our future, building our dreams. And when Jack was born, everything felt complete. Watching Miles hold him in his arms, that look of love and pride on his face, made me believe we had everything we needed to make it through whatever life threw our way. Thank you so much for being part of this journey. If you're enjoying these stories and want to see more, don't forget to subscribe. It's free and helps us grow this amazing community. Let's dive in. But nothing stays perfect forever. I started to notice little changes in Miles. He'd come home later than usual, and I began to feel the chill of distance between us, the space that wasn't there before. At first, I dismissed it, telling myself that work had gotten busier, that life was moving faster than we could keep up with. But as the days turned into weeks, my heart began to sink. There were whispers in my mind, doubts that I couldn't push away. Something had shifted, and I could feel it in the air, in the way Miles would pull away just a little too quickly when I reached out for him. I thought about confronting him. I wanted to ask if there was someone else, but the thought terrified me. The love I had for him was real, and I couldn't fathom the idea of it slipping away. Still, the signs were undeniable. One night, I found a strange number on his phone, a number he couldn't explain. I asked him about it, my voice trembling with that all-too-familiar mixture of fear and hope. He assured me it was nothing, just a colleague, just work. And I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the truth came crashing down on me one evening, not with a confrontation, but with a casual remark that cut through the air like a blade. Miles wasn't the one who told me about the affair. No, that would have been too kind. It was his own carelessness that gave it away. I overheard a conversation while he thought I wasn't listening. He was talking to her, his voice low and intimate, a sound I hadn't heard directed at me in months. In that moment, my world tilted. I could barely breathe. Everything I had known, everything I had trusted, seemed to evaporate in the air between us. He had cheated. I didn't need any more evidence. The pain was enough. When I confronted him later that night, there was no argument, no defense. Just a broken man who knew he had failed me. He said the words I never wanted to hear. "I'm sorry, Ruby. But it's over." He apologized for everything, but it was too late for apologies. The damage was done, and I could feel my heart crumbling under the weight of it. But then, just when I thought I had everything figured out, Miles begged me to forgive him. He cried, he pleaded, he promised he would change. And foolishly, I believed him. I didn't want to break up our family. I didn't want Jack to grow up in a broken home. I wanted to believe that our love was worth saving, that Miles was worth saving. So I forgave him, even though every part of me screamed to walk away. 2 months passed, and life returned to some semblance of normalcy. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had irreparably changed. Miles seemed distant, and I too was emotionally withdrawn. We went through the motions of being a couple, but the bond we once shared felt like it was slipping through my fingers like sand in the wind. I didn't know it then, but my life was about to change in a way I never could have imagined. One morning, I decided to run a quick errand, something as mundane as picking up groceries. It seemed like a small thing, but in hindsight, I see now that it was the moment that set everything in motion. I had no idea that a truck, empty and without warning, would crash into my car on the way home. The impact was sudden, a sharp jolt that sent everything spinning. The world around me went dark, and I knew nothing beyond that. When I woke up, I was in a hospital room. The sterile smell of the place made my head spin, and I felt a sharp pain in my skull as if someone had taken a hammer to it. I tried to move, but my body was weak, unresponsive. Panic surged in my chest as I realized something was wrong. Too wrong. I couldn't remember what had happened. The last thing I remembered was walking out the door that morning, everything feeling normal. But now everything was different. I heard voices around me, hushed and distant, and then through the haze I saw Miles. He was standing by my side, his face drawn with worry. But there was something else in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. The doctors had told him and everyone else that I might never wake up. They had said it with finality, with a sense of inevitability that crushed me as much as it crushed him. The moment the words left their lips, I saw his shoulders relax. I saw the relief in his eyes, the quiet joy he tried to mask but couldn't. He thought I was gone for good. And in his mind he had already moved on. While I lay in that bed, unconscious, Miles had found solace in the arms of another woman. His betrayal, it seemed, had gone beyond just infidelity. It had become abandonment. Abandonment of me, of Jack, of the life we had built together. I didn't know it then, but the seed of revenge had already been planted in my heart. I wasn't ready to forgive anymore. But I was ready for something else entirely. This was only the beginning. The darkness of the hospital room enveloped me, but the weight of the situation soon became impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the aching pain in my head, the dull throb that echoed in every corner of my mind. It was the absence of something that should have been there. Miles. He was standing at my bedside, but it wasn't the loving man I once knew. No, there was a distance in his gaze, something that wasn't right. I had no words to speak, no energy to question him, but my eyes, wide with confusion, locked with his. He hadn't realized I could still feel him watching me, but I could. His posture was stiff, his body turned away just slightly as if he were trying to shield some part of himself from me. I couldn't place it, but the unease grew within me like a storm on the horizon, threatening to burst through. I felt his hand on mine, his touch gentle, but it lacked warmth, lacked care. It was as if he were going through the motions. Maybe he was. I was barely alive after all. The doctors had said I might not wake up. It didn't sound like a gentle suggestion. It was a statement. But even in that haze of uncertainty, something stirred inside me. He thought I wouldn't come back. He thought I was already gone. And then I heard it. A voice, Miles' voice, low and quiet but still sharp enough to pierce the silence. His words were directed at someone on the other end of the phone, but I caught every syllable as though they were meant for me alone. I can't be here for much longer. It's too much. I need to focus on myself now. There's someone else. She's been there for me. I need her. The words hit me like a slap. Miles, my husband, had moved on. In the brief window of time I had been trapped in that unconscious state, he had already found someone else to lean on, someone else to fill the space I used to occupy. He wasn't talking about Jack. He wasn't talking about our family. He was talking about another woman. The betrayal wasn't just the affair I had suspected before. It was his abandonment of me, of everything we had. It was a wound so deep that I couldn't even begin to process it in that moment. My vision blurred, and for a second I almost let the tears fall. But I didn't. I refused to let them escape. Not now. Not anymore. I thought of Jack, our son, and how he was likely alone somewhere waiting for his father to return to him. His little hands, his innocent eyes, and the way he would cling to me after a long day, seeking comfort from his mother. He had been my reason for everything. And now Miles, the man who had vowed to protect us, was leaving both of us behind. The more I listened to Miles, the more I understood. He was afraid of the life that had been his. He wanted to escape. The weight of being a husband, a father, it was too much for him. He wanted the freedom he thought was waiting just outside our home with someone else, someone who wasn't tied to the reality of responsibilities. Someone who didn't have the power to shatter him as I had done, just by asking questions. His words echoed in my mind, but they weren't just words. They were his resignation, his final act of cowardice. And I wasn't going to let him off the hook that easily. Over the next few days, I drifted between consciousness and unconsciousness, but my mind was working overtime. I couldn't stop the flow of thoughts and images that consumed me. I saw the truth for what it was. I wasn't just hurt. I was betrayed, and worse, I was being discarded as if I didn't matter. When I finally woke up fully, the room was dim and Miles was no longer by my side. My body felt heavy, and it was as if the air itself was thick with the weight of everything I had just discovered. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft beeping of the machines that monitored my condition. But I didn't need to hear the machines to know that the man I had loved was no longer the person I thought he was. He was gone emotionally, and his absence now felt like a chasm that I could never fill. It wasn't until the nurse came in that I realized just how much had changed. The look she gave me was too knowing, too careful, like she was walking on eggshells. I tried to sit up, but my head swam with dizziness. The nurse helped me adjust, her hands firm and kind. "You've been through a lot," she said, her voice gentle but layered with pity. "You've had a long recovery, but you're strong. Your son is here. And your husband too, of course. He's been by your side." Her words stung, though I knew she didn't mean them to. I wanted to ask about the other woman. I wanted to scream at her and demand answers. But I couldn't. Not yet. I had to let everything settle. I needed to understand how I would move forward. It was only when I asked about Jack that the nurse's expression faltered. She hesitated, looking at the floor for a moment before she spoke again, softer now. "Your husband took him to his mother's house. He said he needed a break." That was all I needed to hear. Miles had already moved on. He'd made a choice. He wasn't just emotionally absent. He had physically removed himself from the situation. Jack, our little boy, was caught in the middle, a casualty of his father's indecisiveness. In that moment, the rage that had been simmering inside me erupted. It wasn't just the affair that had destroyed me. It was the way he had abandoned his own child, as if Jack didn't matter, as if our family didn't matter. I had been fighting for survival, and while I was struggling to regain consciousness, Miles was out there living a new life without us. The tears finally came, but they weren't for the man I had loved. No, these tears were for Jack, for the innocent child who had no idea what was happening, who was left to wonder why his father was no longer there. I had to protect him. I had to make sure that no one would ever hurt him like this again. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The rage was no longer an emotion. It was a force. I wasn't just going to forgive Miles. I wasn't going to let this go. He had betrayed me, but more importantly, he had betrayed Jack. And for that he would pay. No one was going to get away with abandoning their family. Not on my watch. I had been given a second chance at life, and I would make sure that the man who had hurt me would never get the chance to hurt anyone else again. It was strange how quickly things could change. One moment I was in that hospital room, fighting against the overwhelming wave of betrayal that threatened to consume me. The next I was lying in a car, an empty street ahead, and the world crashing down all around me. The accident happened so suddenly, so violently, that I didn't even have time to register it before everything went dark. The last thing I remember was the sound of tires screeching, a flash of silver as a truck veered toward my vehicle. There was no time to react, no time to even scream. The impact was instantaneous, the force of it sending my body into a state of shock. I remember the pain, the sharp, burning sensation that shot through my skull, but everything else was consumed by darkness. I don't know how long I was unconscious. Hours, maybe longer. The days blurred together as I lay there, my mind lost in the fog of the coma. I didn't know if I was alive or if I had crossed over into some other place. But somewhere in the depths of that unconscious state, I could still hear their voices. The faint murmur of conversations, the rustle of sheets, the soft beeping of machines. There was one voice I couldn't escape though. It was Miles. His voice was soft, full of concern, but there was something else, something I couldn't place. A hint of relief. I couldn't be sure. It was as though he was talking to someone else, as if he no longer saw me as the woman he had loved. "Ruby's not going to make it," he'd said to someone on the phone one evening. "I don't think she's ever coming back. I need to move on." That was when the world inside me started to break. I couldn't understand it. I was still here, still clinging to life, still fighting against whatever fate had decided for me. But Miles, my husband, my partner, had already written me off. He had already moved on. His words, so casual, so certain, were a blow that hit harder than the crash itself. The doctor said I was a fighter. They said that I had a chance even if they couldn't explain why I was still alive. But I didn't know if it was worth fighting for. Not when the one person I had trusted with everything, my heart, my soul, my family, was already planning his escape. It wasn't until the 5th day of my coma that I heard a knock on the door. A soft, tentative sound that broke the monotony of the hospital room. I couldn't turn my head, couldn't move to see who it was, but I could feel the presence in the room. My mind raced, trying to place it. When the door opened, I recognized the voice immediately. It wasn't Miles's. It was the voice of the woman he had replaced me with. The woman he had found while I lay in that hospital bed, too weak to fight for myself. Her name was Claire. He sounded sweet, too sweet to be true. But beneath the surface, I could feel the jealousy simmering, the subtle satisfaction in her voice that I was no longer a threat to her. She was here now in my place. She's not going to make it, is she? Claire's voice was soft, almost comforting. She was talking to the nurse, but I could hear every word. The nurse hesitated as if unsure how to respond. We don't know, Claire. We just don't know. She's still holding on. Claire didn't seem to care. She was already planning for the future, her mind focused on the life she would inherit once I was gone. I think it's time we start thinking about what comes next, Claire said, her words clear and final. My blood boiled inside me. I could hear them, the two of them making plans, deciding what to do with my life, with my family. Miles had moved on. He had found someone else. And I was nothing more than a shadow of the woman I had once been. But I wasn't gone. Not yet. And I wouldn't let them get away with this. Over the next few days I gathered all the strength I could muster. The fog of the coma slowly began to lift, and with it the weight of the betrayal. I couldn't let Miles off the hook. I couldn't let him walk away with Claire, leaving me in the past as if I had never mattered. But I was trapped, my body weak, my mind still struggling to regain control. The machines kept me tethered to the world I no longer recognized. And yet, there was a fire within me that refused to be extinguished. I was still Ruby. I was still Jack's mother, and no one, no matter how much they thought they had taken from me, was going to take away my son, my life, or my dignity. In the days that followed, the hospital room became a battleground. Miles would come and go, always with Claire at his side, her smile plastered on her face as if everything was normal. She would sit by my bed, pretending to care, pretending to worry. But I knew the truth. She wasn't here for me. She was here for what she thought was hers. And she had no idea what was coming. The more I watched them, the more I realized how far Miles had fallen. He had become someone I didn't recognize. His visits were hollow, full of empty promises and forced affection. He would tell me how sorry he was, how much he regretted what had happened, but his words felt like nothing more than a convenient script he had memorized. He had no real remorse. He was too busy thinking about Claire, too busy making sure his new life was in place. I wanted to scream, to tell him how much he had hurt me, how much he had shattered everything we had built. But I couldn't. Not yet. I had to be patient. I had to wait until the right moment arrived. And then one day it did. I woke up to the sound of Claire's voice again, her soft laughter cutting through the room. She was sitting on the edge of my bed talking to Miles. I couldn't understand all of their words, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening. They were planning their future, discussing their life without me. I could feel the anger rising within me, hotter than it had ever been before. I had been betrayed by the man I loved, abandoned by the father of my child, and now they were treating me like I didn't matter. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to let this stand. I wasn't going to let them tear apart my life and my family without consequences. I would fight back. I would take back everything that was rightfully mine. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. The world outside my consciousness was a blur of muffled voices and dim lights. It felt like floating in an endless space, suspended between two realms, the living and the dead. I wasn't truly aware of the passage of time. It was as if days stretched into weeks, or perhaps weeks into days. I could hear them all, the whispers, the hushed tones of concern and sympathy. The nurses, the doctors, the occasional murmur of a visitor, the sound of footsteps fading away as they passed by my room. But nothing seemed real. It was all a vague outline, a distant echo, and none of it mattered. What mattered, what I clung to, was the single painful truth. Miles had moved on. I couldn't see him clearly, couldn't make out his face. But I could feel his presence in the room, the discomfort in his every movement as he tried to act normal, to convince himself that he was doing the right thing. The more I listened to his words, the more his behavior puzzled me. There was no real concern in his voice when he spoke to the nurses. His conversations were terse, clipped, as though he were eager to leave, eager to be somewhere else, anywhere else except by my side. I was just a burden to him now. I had been in that coma for what felt like forever. And during that time I was aware of something else, something deeper than the surface sounds. There was a new presence in the room. I could hear her, his mistress, Claire. Her voice, so sweet, so soothing, filled the air with a presence I could never ignore. I could tell she was always there, sitting by his side, whispering words of comfort and reassurances. They had already made their plans, already mapped out their future without me. In my absence, Miles and Claire had found solace in each other's arms, building a life I was no longer part of. But I couldn't stop listening. I couldn't stop hearing the little things they said. I was trapped in my own body, my mind awake while my body was still broken. They didn't know I could hear them. They didn't know I could feel their betrayal inching closer, filling the room with suffocating air. And the worst part? They didn't know how much I understood. How much I could feel. One afternoon I overheard them talking again, the words seeping into my ears as if they were meant to break me. "Miles, you should just let her go," Claire said, her voice so kind, so insistent. "It's been days now. If she hasn't woken up, she's not going to. We both know that. You've been here long enough. It's time for you to think about yourself. Think about us. We can build a life together away from all of this. You don't need to be tied to her anymore." Her words were smooth, almost convincing. She spoke of a future that had nothing to do with me. It was a future that didn't even acknowledge my existence. "Miles?" His response was almost too soft. "I know. I'm just not sure how to move on, Claire. It feels wrong, but..." I could hear the hesitation in his voice. A small part of him still clung to some vestige of guilt, of duty. But the more Claire spoke, the more I could hear his resolve shatter. "You'll be fine, Miles," she continued, her voice turning warm and coaxing. "You've already given her everything she deserves. You've been there for her, done your part. Now it's time for you to take care of yourself. She's not going to wake up, Miles. You need to accept it." I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to listen to them plan their life together as if I were already out of the picture. But the reality of it settled into my bones, sharp and cold, and there was no escaping it. Miles had already written me off. He was already planning his future with someone else, leaving me behind like some broken, discarded thing. And my son? What would happen to him when all of this was over? What would happen when his father moved on and I was gone? But I wasn't gone. Not yet. Not by a long shot. I refused to let them take everything from me. I refused to let Miles and Claire destroy my family, tear apart the life I had built with Jack. As the days passed, I started to regain small bits of my strength. My mind was clearer, my body a little less sluggish. I couldn't move yet, couldn't open my eyes, but I could feel the difference. My muscles ached as if they were waking up after years of disuse. It was slow, agonizing, but it was progress. I was still here. And I had a plan. Miles thought I was too weak to fight. Claire thought I was nothing more than a shell of the woman I used to be. They both believed I would just disappear quietly, fade away like an afterthought. But they were wrong. I wasn't going anywhere. One morning, as the sun filtered in through the blinds, I managed to crack my eyes open just enough to see the blurred outlines of figures standing beside me. I couldn't fully focus on their faces, but I recognized Miles's silhouette, his shoulders hunched, his expression unreadable. And then there was Claire, sitting beside him, her hand on his arm, a look of triumph in her eyes. For a fleeting moment I thought I saw something else. Regret? Guilt? But it was gone too quickly for me to be sure. The moment passed and the cold indifference took its place. Miles wasn't here for me. He wasn't here for Jack. He was here because he had nowhere else to go. But even that wasn't enough to keep him grounded. He was already slipping away. That's when I made up my mind. I would fight back. I would make sure they understood just how much they had underestimated me. How much they had underestimated the power of a mother's love, the unbreakable bond between a parent and a child. I couldn't speak yet. I couldn't even sit up. But my mind was sharp. And in that moment I realized something important. I wasn't alone. My son. He was my reason to keep fighting. I couldn't let him grow up without a mother. I couldn't let Miles and Claire tear our family apart. I would make sure that, no matter what, Jack would know the truth. He would know that his mother fought for him. And in the end, that was all that mattered. So I waited. I waited for the moment when I would finally have the strength to speak, to stand, and to take back what was mine. They had underestimated me. They had underestimated the fury of a woman scorned. But they were about to learn. The game had just begun. The days passed, each one a silent victory over the uncertainty that had plagued my body. My mind, though hazy at first, was sharper now. I could feel the strength returning to me, slow but persistent. But while my body regained its power, I was haunted by the knowledge that Miles and Claire were already moving forward, their new life waiting just out of reach. They had long written me off, assuming I would fade into the background like some forgotten chapter in their lives. But they didn't understand one simple truth. I wasn't done. Not yet. Not by a long shot. I could still feel them around me like ghosts in the room. Miles, with his strained attempts at pretending everything was fine, and Claire sitting close to him, her false sympathy dripping from every word she spoke. It wasn't just their presence that bothered me. It was their certainty that I had been defeated. They believed I was too weak to ever fight back, that I would be content with simply disappearing into nothingness. But I could feel the fire inside me. I would not let them tear apart my family. I would not allow them to erase me from my son's life. But there was more to it than just bitterness. The rage I felt wasn't just for myself. It was for Jack. My son. My baby boy who had been abandoned in all of this. Miles didn't care about the damage he was causing. He didn't care that Jack needed him, needed both of us. He was too wrapped up in his own selfish desires, too focused on escaping the consequences of his actions. But I would not allow him to steal Jack away from me. As I lay there in the sterile, cold room, I began to realize that this fight, this battle, wouldn't be won by just waking up and going home. No. I needed more than that. I needed to be strategic. I needed to take back control, and for that I would have to play their game. But I would do it on my terms. The idea started small, just a thought, barely an echo in the back of my mind. What if I didn't just wake up and walk away? What if I didn't just let them leave with their new life and let them think they had won? What if I made sure they knew exactly what they had done? What if I could take everything from them? Miles, Claire, and the twisted version of my life that they wanted to create. It all had to end. But how? The answer came to me in fragments, sharp like glass shards. I could already hear Claire's voice again, soft and smug, telling Miles that I would never wake up, that I had no more fight in me. I could hear her whispering that it was time for him to choose her, time for him to start fresh. I could picture the smile on her face as she took my place, pretending to be the woman who would fix everything for him. But I was still here. And this was my life, my family. Not hers. I had to be clever. I had to make sure I got exactly what I wanted out of this situation. My son back and Miles held accountable for the wreckage he had caused. I had to use what I had left. The few cards still in my hand. A few more days passed and I could feel the change in the air around me. Miles was beginning to stay away more and more. He was tired, I could tell, though I doubted it was because of me. It was because of Claire, his desire for a fresh start with her. The pressure of playing the dutiful husband in a crumbling marriage had become too much. It wasn't until he finally stopped visiting altogether that I realized I had to act now, before he made his final move. I overheard something that day, something that was the final piece of the puzzle. Claire had come to the hospital again, as she always did, to check on me, to act like she cared. But this time I heard a conversation that made my blood run cold. "Do you think she's really gone for good this time?" Claire asked, her voice almost too sweet to be real. "Yeah," Miles replied, his tone flat. "The doctors say there's no chance. I can't keep doing this anymore. I have to move on." "Then it's just you and me, Miles," Claire said. "We can finally start our life. We can leave this place behind." Her words cut deep like knives twisting in my chest. I wasn't just being written out of their lives. I was being erased entirely. And that was when I knew I couldn't just sit back and let them get away with it. That night, when the lights dimmed and the nurses did their rounds, I began to take the first steps in my plan. It was risky, so much so that my heart thudded in my chest, threatening to betray me. But I had to do it. I had to make sure that Miles and Claire paid for their betrayal, for their cruelty. I wasn't just going to let them take everything from me. I had access to certain documents now. Files left out carelessly by a nurse who didn't think to check them. They were divorce papers, the same papers Miles had left on my bed when I first went into the coma. But now they were more than just a symbol of his abandonment. They were a tool. A weapon. I had to sign them. I had to act as though I were agreeing to their terms. And so, with shaky hands but a steely resolve, I scribbled my name on the paper. It was a simple act, but it was the first step toward getting my revenge. But I wouldn't just sign away my life. No. I would use this moment to turn the tables on them. I would make sure that when Miles saw these papers, he would realize the consequences of his actions. The next step was sending the papers. I had to ensure they reached him, delivered in the most public way possible. That was the key. I couldn't just hand them over in private. Miles needed to understand that this wasn't just some quiet, simple divorce. This was me taking back control. This was me taking everything from him, piece by piece. It wasn't enough to sign those papers and walk away. It wasn't enough to simply let them think they had won. I had to make sure they paid for the hurt they caused me. For abandoning me. For abandoning our son. The plan was in motion. The game had begun and I wasn't going to lose. The tides were turning. Miles thought he had everything in hand. But he had underestimated me. He had underestimated the depth of a mother's love, the power of a woman's resolve. He hadn't realized that I was just getting started. And soon he would feel the full force of my vengeance. The tables were turning. The battle was far from over. And when I finally stood up, when I finally spoke my truth, everything in their world would come crashing down. I wasn't sure how long I had been lying there, caught between the fog of unconsciousness and the reality I was trying to deny. The world outside my mind moved in slow motion, but I was no longer a passive observer. Every ounce of my energy was dedicated to one thing: taking back what was mine. Miles and Claire believed they had won, that they could walk away without consequence, but they had underestimated me. It wasn't enough to simply wake up from my coma and move on. No, this betrayal wasn't something I could just brush aside. My life, my family, had been shattered by Miles' selfishness, his heartless actions. And while he may have believed that his little escape with Claire would somehow give him freedom, he hadn't considered that I was still here. Still fighting. The first few days after waking up were a blur of pain and confusion. My head throbbed, the sharp ache of it making everything feel surreal. The doctor's words echoed in my mind: "You've been through a lot." But it wasn't just my physical wounds that hurt. It was the emotional scars, deep and raw, left behind by the man who had promised me everything and then walked away the moment it became inconvenient. I was angry. Angry at him. Angry at Claire. Angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. The betrayal had been too much, too cruel, and it had been aimed not just at me but at my son. He deserved better than a father who could so easily abandon him for someone else. But I had a plan now. A plan to make sure Miles understood exactly what he had lost. A plan to get everything back: the trust, the power, the control. The days in the hospital room became my time to strategize. I listened to their conversations when they thought I was still out of it, and with each passing moment, I became more certain that I would not let them go unpunished. Miles, so sure of his new life with Claire, didn't realize that I could still hear every word they spoke. Every whispered promise. Every mention of their future together. A future built on the ruins of everything I had once held dear. It was one of those days when Claire visited again. Her voice was sweet, almost too sugary, as she tried to reassure Miles that everything would be fine. But what struck me the most was the certainty in her tone, the way she spoke as if nothing could possibly go wrong. "She's not coming back, Miles. You've done all you could. It's time to think about yourself now." Those words cut through me like a knife. I could feel the weight of them in my chest. They thought I was already gone. But I wasn't. I was here, and I had every intention of making sure they understood the consequences of their actions. But the first step was regaining control of my life. The first step was breaking free from this hospital bed, this cage of pain and helplessness that had kept me tied to a life that no longer belonged to me. I needed to show Miles, to show Claire, that they had made a grave mistake. That this wasn't just about them, it was about me. The family they had cast aside. I spent days plotting, waiting for the right moment. I couldn't just walk out of that room in a daze, weak and vulnerable. No, I had to be strategic. I had to make sure that when the time came, I would be in control of the situation. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity. Reclaiming my life. I wouldn't let them think they could erase me, not when I still had the power to stand up and fight. One evening, when Miles left the hospital room to grab something to eat, I knew the time had come. Claire was sitting by my bedside, her hand resting too possessively on my arm. I could feel the tension in her touch, the way she was trying to appear concerned, trying to play the role of the loving caretaker. But I could see through her act. She didn't care. Not for me. Not for Jack. She only cared about what she could gain from all of this. She was about to learn that I was not someone who could be easily pushed aside. I managed to summon every ounce of strength in my body to move my hand, just enough to grab a pen and scrawl my name on a piece of paper left on the bedside table. It was a simple act, but in that moment it was everything. I was taking back control. I wasn't just a passive participant in my own life anymore. I was making decisions again. As Claire chatted mindlessly, her words washed over me, but I wasn't really listening. My focus was on the papers. On the divorce papers Miles had left on the bed so carelessly, thinking I would never see them again. Thinking I wouldn't notice. But I had seen them, and now I was signing them. This wasn't just about me giving up. This wasn't me admitting defeat. No, this was about me showing Miles and Claire that I still had the upper hand. I was going to use their own mistake against them. They had underestimated me, and now I would make sure they knew what that felt like. I knew exactly what I had to do next. I needed to make sure that Miles couldn't just ignore this. I needed to make sure he couldn't just walk away without facing the consequences. This wasn't just about a divorce anymore. It was about holding him accountable. For everything. I waited until Claire left the room to take a call, and that was when I made my move. I called the nurse in and requested that the papers be handed over to Miles as soon as possible. The nurse, who had always been polite and efficient, nodded without asking questions. She didn't know what I had planned, but she did as I asked. I knew Miles would be furious when he saw the papers. He would think this was my way of giving up, of surrendering. But that was the beauty of it. He wouldn't see it coming. He would be so focused on his own guilt that he wouldn't even notice the trap I was setting. And when the papers reached him, when he saw what I had done, that's when everything would start to unravel. It wasn't just about getting revenge on Miles. It was about making sure that when everything collapsed, when the world he had tried to build with Claire crumbled, he would remember who had truly been there, who had given everything for their family, and who would never let him forget the consequences of his choices. As the hours passed, I could feel the tension building. I knew that Miles would be back soon, and with him the storm that would shake everything in his world. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life, and I wasn't going to stop until I had everything I deserved. Miles thought he had won, but he had no idea what was coming. And soon he would learn that betraying me had been his biggest mistake yet. The following days were a blur of decisions, and as my strength grew, so did my resolve. I knew that the next step in reclaiming my life would not come from merely waking up or signing divorce papers. It was in the fight for my future, for my son, and for the life I had worked so hard to build. Miles had made his choice, but it was time to make sure he faced the consequences of his actions. I couldn't just let him walk away unscathed, leaving me and Jack behind to pick up the pieces. This wasn't just about getting my revenge. It was about justice. The moment I signed the divorce papers and had them handed over to Miles, a certain relief washed over me, but I knew this was only the beginning. A cold, calculated beginning. I wasn't about to let him off easy, and neither was I going to sit back and let him take Jack from me without a fight. I needed to make sure that the custody of our son, our child, was secure. Miles may have been absent in every other aspect of our relationship, but I would not let him steal Jack from me. He would not grow up with a man who had shown him nothing but neglect. I spent hours in that hospital room, hidden away from the world outside, making phone calls and putting the pieces of the puzzle together. I had to be careful. It wasn't just about my emotions anymore. It was about building a case, about ensuring that when the time came I had the upper hand. I had to outsmart him. He was the one who had betrayed me, and I wasn't about to give him a free pass, no matter how many times he showed up with Claire in tow. I spoke with a lawyer, a woman named Sarah, who immediately understood the gravity of my situation. She didn't hesitate when I explained what had happened. Miles's infidelity, his neglect of our family, his complete disregard for our son. Sarah was sharp, focused, and she made me feel like I wasn't alone in this battle. "We'll make sure you get what you deserve, Ruby," she said, her voice reassuring but firm. "And we'll make sure Jack is kept safe from all of this." The weight of the situation began to sink in as I met with Sarah multiple times in the coming weeks. We gathered evidence, compiled everything I could to prove Miles's neglect and his absence from Jack's life. I shared my feelings, my memories, everything that had led me to this point. I thought about the moments when Miles would go missing for hours, never offering an explanation. The way he had treated me as though I were nothing more than an afterthought. And the moment he chose to move on while I was still in a coma, as if I had no right to fight for what was mine. But the worst part, the part that gnawed at me every single day, the way he abandoned Jack, his son, for the sake of his own selfish desires. Miles had turned his back on the one person who needed him most. It wasn't just betrayal, it was abandonment. And it was unforgivable. I knew it would be a long fight, but I was ready. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my life again. The papers Miles had left on the bed when I was unconscious. They had been nothing more than a tool to get him what he wanted. But now they were a weapon in my hands. Sarah helped me understand how custody cases worked and what I could expect. She told me to be prepared for a fight. Miles wouldn't go down without trying to turn everything in his favor. He would likely argue that I wasn't fit to care for Jack, that my health challenges had made me unstable. But I wasn't worried. I knew better than anyone that I could be a great mother, even if the road had been difficult. Jack deserved a mother who was there for him, who fought for him with everything she had. And I wasn't going to let anything stand in my way. As the days wore on, I grew more determined. I spent my time preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The one thing I knew for sure was that I would not be silent. Not anymore. Not for Miles. Not for Claire. And definitely not for anyone who tried to take Jack away from me. The day of the hearing arrived faster than I expected. Felt like everything was moving in fast forward. I had been preparing myself for months, but now it was real. The weight of what was to come sank in when I stood in front of the courthouse. I was no longer just a woman fighting for her family. I was a mother standing in front of a courtroom fighting for her son. Miles was there, of course, with Claire by his side, looking as confident as ever. I could see the way they exchanged glances, how Miles pretended like everything was perfectly fine. But inside I knew he was terrified. This wasn't just about a divorce. This was about his actions catching up to him. It was about him being held accountable for the choices he had made. I had everything ready. Evidence, testimonies, and the proof that Miles had neglected his responsibilities as a father. The courtroom was tense as the case unfolded, with Sarah presenting our arguments, outlining the countless ways Miles had failed both me and Jack. The judge listened carefully, occasionally asking questions, but it was clear that the weight of the evidence was starting to tip in our favor. But Miles? He wasn't going down without a fight. He tried to twist the narrative, tried to paint himself as the victim. He claimed that I wasn't fit to care for Jack, that I had been too focused on my health struggles and hadn't been there for our son. But his words fell flat. The reality was too clear. Miles had been absent emotionally and physically for far too long. He had chosen Claire over his own flesh and blood, abandoning the very person he was supposed to protect. I could feel the tension in the room rising as the judge deliberated. I was on edge, my heart racing, but I refused to show any weakness. I had come too far to let Miles take anything else from me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge returned with the verdict. I held my breath, waiting for the moment that would change everything. The words came slowly, but when they did, they were clear and final. I was granted full custody of Jack. The relief that washed over me was almost overwhelming. I had won. The fight wasn't over, but this victory was mine. And as the gavel struck, I knew that this was just the beginning of reclaiming my life. Miles would have to live with the consequences of his actions. But for now I had what mattered most. My son. As we walked out of the courtroom, I looked at Jack, holding his hand in mine. I knew I had done the right thing. The battle for our future had just begun, and I was ready to fight with everything I had. The gavel's echo had barely faded when the weight of the verdict started to sink in. Full custody. It was more than I had hoped for. It was more than I had fought for. Miles had lost. In the cold, quiet moments following the judge's decision, I could feel every bit of that victory. It was mine, but it was also Jack's. I had won the battle for my son's future. I had taken back what was rightfully ours. But as I walked out of the courthouse with Jack's hand in mine, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that it wasn't over. Miles wouldn't accept defeat easily. He would try to manipulate the situation to shift the narrative in his favor, to make sure I paid for what had just happened. I knew him too well. He wouldn't just walk away and let it end there. And so, as the days passed, I braced myself for the inevitable. Miles would come for me. I could feel it in my bones. He had always been good at playing the victim, twisting everything to suit his narrative. But this time I was ready. He could manipulate the world, but he couldn't manipulate me anymore. I didn't have to wait long. It started with a phone call, one I had been expecting but still dreaded. The sound of Miles's voice on the other end, smooth and calculated as ever. "Ruby, I know you think you've won. But you're not going to get away with this. I'll make sure of it." His words didn't faze me. In fact, they only reinforced the belief that I had made the right choice. Miles wasn't going to let me raise Jack without a fight, but I wasn't going to let him dictate the terms anymore. Not after everything he had done. Not after how he had treated both me and our son. "I'm not afraid of you, Miles," I said, my voice steady. "You've already shown your true colors. This isn't about winning or losing. This is about doing what's right. And I'm going to make sure Jack has the life he deserves." There was a pause on the other end. For a moment I thought he might back down, but then the venom crept back into his voice. You think you're so much better than me? You think I won't fight for my son? You've taken everything from me, Ruby. Everything. The anger in his voice made my resolve even stronger. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about me, and this was about Jack. He had already chosen to abandon us, to walk away from his responsibilities. And now he was trying to turn this around and make me the villain. It wasn't going to work. You don't get to play the victim anymore, Miles, I said. You've already made your choices. You've already shown me who you are. And Jack deserves better than someone like you. The line went silent again, and I could hear the heavy breathing on the other end. Miles was seething with rage. But that was his problem, not mine. He had no power over me anymore. No power over my son. It was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. But even after that conversation, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was planning something bigger. He didn't just want to be a part of Jack's life, he wanted to ruin mine. He wanted to drag me back into his mess, make me pay for leaving him, for making the decision to move on without him. And so I prepared. I knew Miles would be relentless. He would stop at nothing to get what he thought he deserved. But I had something he didn't. A clear conscience, a fierce love for my son, and the unwavering determination to protect him. I wasn't going to let him destroy everything I had worked for. The next move came unexpectedly. One morning I received a letter from Miles's attorney, demanding that the custody agreement be revisited. He claimed that I was unfit to be Jack's primary guardian, that I had made impulsive decisions, and that I wasn't in a stable enough emotional state to raise him. It was his classic move. To paint himself as the better option, to manipulate the situation, and to make me look like the villain. I knew exactly what was happening. He was trying to turn the system against me. He was trying to use our past against me. But I wasn't going to let him win. I was going to fight back harder than I ever had before. I consulted with my lawyer, Sarah, who was confident we could counter Miles's claims. This is nothing but a desperate attempt to make you look bad, Ruby, she said. He knows he doesn't stand a chance. But we'll make sure that everything he's doing will only work against him in the long run. But it wasn't just the legal battle I had to worry about. Miles was playing a dangerous game. His actions were becoming more erratic, more desperate. He wasn't just trying to win custody of Jack, he was trying to break me. I could see the toll it was taking on him, the cracks in his carefully constructed facade. The man who had once been so charming, so confident, was unraveling before my eyes. The more he fought for something he couldn't have, the more he pushed away the very thing he claimed to want. One day I found out just how far Miles was willing to go. A private investigator reached out to me, claiming that Miles had been involved in shady business dealings, trying to secure funds to prolong his legal battle. He was trying to buy influence, to manipulate the system in his favor. It was a desperate, reckless move. But it showed me something important. Miles had already lost. He wasn't just fighting for Jack anymore, he was fighting for control. And the more he fought, the more he alienated everyone around him. The more he lost. I took the evidence and shared it with my lawyer. Sarah was stunned but assured me that this new development could be a game changer. This is exactly the type of thing that will prove his instability, Ruby, she said. We'll use it to our advantage. And so the final blow came. When the court date arrived, I walked into the courtroom with confidence, knowing that I had everything I needed to secure Jack's future. I could see Miles sitting there, his face red with anger, trying to hide the desperation in his eyes. But it was clear, he was losing. The judge listened carefully as Sarah laid out the evidence. Miles's attempts to manipulate the system. His shady dealings. His abandonment of his son. And then the final nail in the coffin. The private investigator's findings, showing just how far Miles had gone to try and force his way into a life that no longer belonged to him. The judge ruled in my favor once again. The custody agreement stood, and Miles's attempts to regain control of Jack's life were dismissed. When I left that courtroom, I felt the weight of the past few months finally lift. Miles had tried everything to destroy me, to destroy my family, but in the end, it was he who had lost. He had played a dangerous game, and it had cost him everything. Jack and I walked out of that courtroom not as victims but as survivors. Our lives were ours again. And Miles would have to live with the consequences of his actions. The victory in court had felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The relief, though immense, was only fleeting. The echo of the gavel still resonated in my mind, a symbol of all that I had fought for, but I knew the road ahead was far from over. Miles had been cornered for now, but his desperation, his need to regain control, would only push him further. I had won the legal battle for custody of Jack, but the emotional war, well, that was just beginning. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to feel a sliver of peace. Jack was mine. He was safe. I could finally focus on healing, on rebuilding. But Miles wasn't the type to accept defeat. I knew he wouldn't just let it go. The danger wasn't over, not by a long shot. As we walked away from the courthouse that day, a shadow loomed over us, one that I couldn't quite shake off. At first, it seemed like Miles had fallen into a quiet, almost passive state. He stopped showing up at the house uninvited, no longer calling at odd hours or leaving long, angry voicemails. It was as though he had retreated into his own world, his pride too wounded to continue fighting. Claire too seemed to disappear from our lives. For a brief moment, I thought perhaps they had both truly moved on, accepting that what they had built on lies had crumbled. But deep down I knew better. I could feel the silence, the waiting. It was only a matter of time before Miles found another way to strike. It started with small things. A sudden call from an unfamiliar number followed by an email that landed in my inbox. The message was terse, cryptic even, but the implications were clear. Miles was attempting to challenge the custody agreement again. But this time it was different. This time he wasn't fighting for Jack. No, this time it was all about discrediting me. He was digging up things from our past, details I hadn't even thought about in years, trying to manipulate the narrative again, making me out to be unfit. The words were vague, but they spoke volumes. Ruby, your emotional instability is a risk to Jack's well-being. You're not the woman you once were. You don't deserve to raise him. I felt the sting of the words, the harsh accusations that rang true only in his mind. This was no longer about custody. This was about power. Miles was attempting to poison the very system that had once protected us. He wanted to turn it all around, and this time he had an even more dangerous weapon at his disposal, his wealth. With Claire at his side, no longer just an accessory but a willing participant, he thought he could buy his way out of this. He had always believed that money and manipulation were the answer to every problem. I spent days stewing in my thoughts, replaying the events of the past, looking for cracks in the system he was trying to exploit. But this time I was ready. I had been through enough to know that Miles was using me as a pawn in his game. He had underestimated me before, but I would make sure he never did again. I contacted Sarah, my lawyer, immediately. There was no room for hesitation. We had to be prepared. But even as I sat in that conference room strategizing our next move, a knot twisted in my stomach. I knew this was different. Miles wasn't just trying to win custody, he was trying to ruin me. To rewrite the story and paint me as the villain. He wanted to take everything from me, and this time he had the resources to do it. Ruby, he's desperate. But desperation is dangerous, Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. We've won in court before and we'll do it again. But you need to be ready. He's playing a different game now. The more Sarah spoke, the more I realized just how high the stakes had become. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was fighting for my son's future, for his safety, and for the truth. Miles wasn't going to back down easily. And with Claire by his side, I had no doubt that he would stop at nothing to reclaim what he felt was his. Days turned into weeks and the pressure mounted. Miles's tactics grew more insidious, and the burden of it all weighed heavily on me. The constant barrage of legal notices, the false accusations, and the emotional toll it took on Jack. All of it combined to create a storm that I couldn't fully prepare for. There were moments when I doubted myself, when I questioned if I was strong enough to fight back. But then I would look at Jack with his wide eyes full of innocence and trust, and I knew what I had to do. I couldn't afford to back down. Not now. Not ever. Then one afternoon the bombshell hit. The private investigator who had been tracking Miles's actions, who had already uncovered some shady dealings, discovered something that sent shockwaves through me. Miles had been hiding money, a hidden fortune that he had used to fund his latest attempts to regain control. But it wasn't just the money, it was the lengths to which he had gone. Miles wasn't just playing dirty in the courtroom. He was using his wealth to manipulate people, to buy influence, and to pull strings behind the scenes. The revelation hit me like a freight train. Miles had thought that with enough money he could rewrite his fate. He believed that he could buy his way out of accountability. But what he hadn't counted on was the way that the truth had a way of surfacing, no matter how deep it was buried. I felt a chill run through me as I absorbed the implications of what this meant. Miles's wealth, his ability to control people and situations, it was all a front. He wasn't the man I had once known. He wasn't even the father he had pretended to be. He was nothing more than a shell, a man desperate to reclaim a life he had lost through his own choices. And then, as if fate itself was playing a part in this twisted tale, a new twist came. The investigator discovered that Miles had made an attempt to bribe a judge who had been overseeing our custody case. The evidence was clear. He had tried to buy his way to a favorable ruling, to sway the legal process in his favor. When Sarah and I presented the evidence to the authorities, it was game over for Miles. The very system he had tried to manipulate would now work against him. The truth had been laid bare and there was no turning back. The court's response was swift. Miles was sanctioned. The judge overseeing our case was dismissed, and a full investigation was launched into Miles's dealings. His attempts to manipulate the outcome were exposed for the world to see. The relief that washed over me was indescribable. The lies, the manipulation, the power struggle, it all came crashing down in an instant. And as I sat with Sarah, reviewing the final verdict, I knew that this chapter of my life, though full of pain and struggle, had finally reached its end. Miles had tried to rewrite his fate, but in the end, it was his own actions that sealed his downfall. The victory wasn't just mine, it was Jack's too. He would grow up knowing that his mother fought for him and that truth in the end was all that mattered. The days after the court's final decision felt like a surreal dream. Everything I had worked for, everything I had fought to protect had finally come to fruition. Jack was mine. He was safe. He was going to grow up in a home full of love, free from the chaos and manipulation that had once defined his life. Felt almost too good to be true. But I knew deep down that this was just the beginning of a new chapter for us. One that would be full of challenges but also full of hope. Still, there was a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond the horizon. Miles had been dealt a crushing blow, but his ability to manipulate and his desire to control hadn't been fully extinguished. I knew he wouldn't just let it go. I could feel his presence in every quiet moment, the shadow of his wrath hanging over me. He had already lost everything, his marriage, his son, his place in our family, and I knew he would stop at nothing to make sure I paid for that. I couldn't afford to let my guard down, not yet. One night as I sat in the living room with Jack playing with his favorite toy cars, I received a call that made my blood run cold. The voice on the other end was calm, too calm, and it sent an immediate wave of unease through me. "Ruby, I think you should know that I've learned something about your new life." Miles's voice dripped with cold intent. "You've won the battle, but I'm not going anywhere. I'll make sure of it." His words were laced with a quiet, simmering threat. The suddenness of the call caught me off guard, and for a moment I could do nothing but grip the phone tightly, my pulse racing. I knew Miles was capable of many things, but this felt different. He had nothing left to lose. And that made him dangerous. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "What are you talking about, Miles? You've lost. You know that." "Oh, I know. But the thing about losing is that it doesn't always end there. You see, Ruby, the thing you don't understand is that I still have power. And I'll make sure you never forget that. I'll make sure you regret everything you've done." Before I could respond, he hung up. The silence that followed was suffocating. I felt like the walls were closing in on me. I glanced over at Jack, who was blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing just beyond the horizon. I smiled at him, trying to calm my racing heart, but deep down I knew this wasn't over. The next few days felt heavy, weighed down by an invisible force. I tried to go about my day-to-day life with Jack, doing everything I could to create a stable, peaceful environment for him. But the tension in my chest never left. The small, subtle signs were there and I couldn't ignore them. Miles was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. One morning as I was leaving the house to take Jack to school, I noticed something that stopped me dead in my tracks. A car parked across the street with dark-tinted windows. It was a small detail, something that might have been easy to overlook if I wasn't already on edge. But something about it felt wrong. I watched the car for a moment, wondering if it was just a coincidence, but then I saw a figure move inside it. A figure I recognized instantly. It was one of Miles's associates. Someone who had always been a part of his world, the kind of person who would do his bidding without question. I felt my stomach churn as the realization sank in. This wasn't just a coincidence. Miles was watching me. And if he was watching me, that meant he was planning something. I couldn't shake the sense of urgency that gripped me. I had to act quickly before Miles had the chance to put whatever plan he had in motion. I called Sarah, my lawyer, and explained everything. She listened carefully, her voice steady as always. Ruby, you need to stay vigilant. If Miles is sending people to watch you, then we know he's not done. You have to be ready for anything. I don't understand, I said, my voice shaking. What could he possibly do now? I don't know. But I do know this, he'll try to use whatever he has left. And right now, that's his influence, his connections. We need to make sure he can't hurt you or Jack again. After the call, I felt like I was walking on a tightrope, every step uncertain, every sound amplified in my ears. I kept my eyes open for any more signs, any more suspicious activity. But as the days went on, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The car across the street disappeared, and for a while, everything seemed to calm down. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Miles wasn't going to give up quietly. He had already shown me how far he was willing to go to reclaim what he had lost. Then, just when I thought the worst was behind me, the unthinkable happened. One evening after putting Jack to bed, I heard a knock on the door. It was late, too late for anyone to be visiting. My heart raced as I approached the door, hesitating for just a moment before I opened it. Standing there on the other side was a man I didn't recognize. He was dressed in a suit, his expression calm, almost too calm. But there was something unsettling about him, something that sent an immediate chill down my spine. I'm here on behalf of Miles, the man said, his voice smooth and professional. He wants to discuss the custody arrangement. He's prepared to take legal action if necessary. He believes you've taken something that isn't yours. Before I could respond, the man handed me a folder. It was thick, filled with papers, but it was the weight of it, the heaviness, that caused my blood to run cold. This wasn't a simple request. This was something bigger. Miles had found a way to challenge the court's decision, to drag everything back into the legal system. As I stood there, staring at the folder in disbelief, I realized that Miles hadn't just given up. He had been waiting, quietly biding his time for the perfect moment to strike again. And this time he was ready to use everything he had at his disposal. I closed the door, my hands trembling as I sat down, opening the folder. The papers inside detailed a new lawsuit, one that was aimed directly at me. Miles was fighting back, using every resource at his disposal to take Jack from me once more. But this time I wouldn't back down. This time I would fight harder than ever before. Because, as I'd learned over the past few months, I was stronger than I had ever realized. And no matter what Miles tried to do, he would never take Jack from me again. This battle was far from over, but I was ready. Whatever Miles had planned, I would be ready to face it. As I sat in the dimly lit living room, the folder in front of me felt like the weight of the world. Miles hadn't given up. He was relentless, using every resource at his disposal to try to take Jack from me. The papers in the folder outlined a new lawsuit, one that challenged the court's previous ruling, and I could feel my heart race as I read the details. The system he had tried to manipulate was once again under his influence, but I wasn't going to let him have the last word. Not now, not ever. I stared at the papers for what seemed like an eternity, trying to process the sheer audacity of Miles's actions. He had already lost. He had already been defeated in the courtroom, yet here he was trying to drag everything back into the legal system. But this time he wasn't just playing for custody. This was about control, about his need to feel powerful in a situation where he had nothing left. Miles had always used manipulation to get what he wanted, and now he was using the courts, the very system that had failed him, to try and erase my victory. I wasn't going to let that happen. With shaking hands, I picked up the phone and called Sarah, my lawyer, who answered almost immediately. I could hear the calm professionalism in her voice, but I knew that underneath it all, we were facing something much bigger now. Sarah, I said, my voice tight, he's coming after us again. He's filed another lawsuit trying to get the custody agreement reversed. This isn't over. I could hear the pause on the other end, as if Sarah was taking a deep breath before responding. I know this is overwhelming, Ruby. But we've got this. We've already been through the hardest part. You've won once and we'll win again. We'll make sure the truth is heard. But even as she spoke with such confidence, I knew that this time things felt different. Miles wasn't just trying to take Jack back for the sake of his own ego. He was going for blood. And I wasn't sure what lengths he was willing to go to. We spent the next few days gathering everything we could to defend against his latest move. I found myself poring over documents, making sure every detail was in place. I thought about the small victories, the moments when Jack and I had found peace after the chaos, and how much I had fought for this life. But now all of it felt fragile again, as if Miles could pull it all away with a single twist. Through it all, I tried to keep Jack safe from the stress of it all. He didn't need to know the full extent of what was happening. All he needed to know was that his mother was there, that I would protect him at all costs. And no matter what Miles tried, I wouldn't let him drag Jack back into a world of manipulation and lies. The hearing arrived with an overwhelming sense of dread, but I wasn't going to let that stop me. As we entered the courtroom, I could feel the tension in the air. Miles sat across from us, his face a mask of bitterness. I could see the weariness in his eyes. He had already lost so much, and I knew this final attempt would only cost him more. He looked over at me, his gaze cold and hard, and for a moment, I felt the weight of everything he had put us through. But then I remembered. I remembered the moments when I stood my ground, when I made the choice to fight for Jack. This was no different. This was just another battle, and I wasn't about to back down. As the proceedings began, I sat beside Sarah, focused and resolute. Miles's attorney began to present their case, arguing that I wasn't fit to be Jack's primary guardian, bringing up every petty detail they could find from my past. But I was ready for this. I had been preparing for this moment, and as Sarah objected to their claims one by one, I knew that this time, we had the truth on our side. We had already proven that I was the one who had always been there for Jack, that I had fought for his safety and well-being. But then, just as I thought the case was going in our favor, the unexpected happened. Miles's attorney presented new evidence, something I hadn't anticipated. They had uncovered a moment from my past, one that, though painful, I thought had been buried long ago. It was a period when I had struggled emotionally after my accident. The photos, the statements from people who had seen me during that time, there were moments that painted a picture of vulnerability. I felt the sting of the words as they were read aloud in the courtroom, and for a moment, I thought I might crumble under the weight of it all. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. I had been vulnerable before, yes. I had struggled, yes. But that didn't define me. That wasn't who I was anymore. And it wasn't who I would let Miles's lawyer make me out to be. I stood up, my voice trembling at first but then gaining strength with every word. Yes, I struggled, I said, looking directly at the judge. But I've fought for my life, for my son, and for the future we deserve. I am not perfect, but I am a mother who has done everything in her power to protect her child. And no matter what Miles tries to use against me, I won't back down. The courtroom fell silent as I spoke. My heart raced, but I could feel the power in my words. The truth was on my side, and I would not let anyone, especially Miles, twist it into something it wasn't. My past didn't define me. My present and my future with Jack did. The judge, a stern woman who had listened intently to both sides, finally spoke. I have reviewed all the evidence. I've listened to both parties. But ultimately what matters here is the best interest of the child. And it is clear to me that Jack's future is with you, Ruby. The court has no reason to overturn the previous custody arrangement. The request is denied. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming, but it was also mixed with a sense of finality. Miles had lost again, and this time there would be no more chances for him. He had exhausted his resources, his manipulation, and his power. And in the end, it was my truth, my strength, and my love for Jack that won. As we left the courtroom, Jack held my hand tightly, looking up at me with a quiet smile. I knelt down to his level and wiped away the tears that had formed in my eyes. "We did it, baby," I whispered. "We're safe. We're together." For the first time in what felt like forever, I breathed freely. The battle was over. Miles had been defeated, and our future was finally ours. There would be no more threats, no more manipulation, no more fear. It was just Jack and me, our family the way it was meant to be. And as we walked out of that courthouse, I knew that this was the moment I would remember for the rest of my life. The moment when I not only reclaimed my son but my strength, my peace, and my future.